Decades after the Cold War ended, a silent threat still sleeps under European soil. American nuclear bombs stationed in secret bunkers across allied nations. But why are they still there? This explosive documentary unpacks the forgotten deals of the Cold War, revealing how NATO's nuclear sharing policy created a quiet chessboard of atomic weapons across Europe, aimed directly at Russia and in some cases never fully under American control. We trace the hidden handshake between the US and countries like Germany, Italy, Belgium, and Turkey. Agreements made in smoke-filled war rooms with a terrifying clause. If war breaks out, local pilots can drop American bombs. As global tensions flare and Russia rattles its nuclear saber, we uncover the shocking truth. These Cold War relics are not just symbolic. They rearmed, maintained, and ready. Twist by twist, the documentary explores. Declassified US military memos revealing just how many near-launch incidents occurred. European citizens unknowingly living beside targets that could start World War III. Secret anti-nuclear protests inside NATO bases that almost exposed the arsenal. And the disturbing modern question, could an Allies' mistake drag America into a nuclear war today? Let's start the documentary. We will discuss in 10 parts. The last part will shock you. Let's start with part 1. Part 1, the bombs we forgot. The United States currently maintains around 100 tactical nuclear bombs in Europe, quietly stationed across NATO bases in countries like Germany, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. These B-61 gravity bombs are stored in underground vaults and fall under a decades-old NATO policy known as nuclear sharing, which allows European allied pilots to deploy US nuclear weapons in wartime. Though the weapons remain under American control in peacetime, their very existence is rarely acknowledged publicly, and many citizens in host countries are unaware they're even there. Originally deployed to deter the Soviet Union during the Cold War, these bombs continue to serve as a forward-deployed nuclear deterrent, a reminder of US commitment to NATO. Let's focus on part 2. Part 2, Origins, the Cold War Gamble. In the early days of the Cold War, the United States faced a chilling reality. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons, a massive conventional army, and direct land access to Western Europe. The US, separated by an ocean, couldn't respond fast enough in the event of a Soviet invasion. To close that gap, Washington made a calculated decision to station American nuclear bombs in Europe. By the late 1950s, the first of these weapons arrived under a new NATO strategy. If the Soviets advanced, NATO forces could retaliate instantly with US nuclear firepower launched from European soil. This wasn't just about firepower. It was psychological warfare, a visible commitment to defend Europe at all costs. The arrangement wasn't just military, it was political. Nuclear sharing allowed European nations to feel involved in a nuclear chain of command without owning their own bombs, while keeping nuclear proliferation in check. But this came with risks. American bombs were now dependent on foreign pilots, foreign bases, and foreign politics. And with dozens of bombs scattered across Europe, any crisis or security failure could have global consequences. From the very beginning, the US gambled that this setup would hold the peace, but it also created a nuclear network so vast and complex, it would outlive the Cold War itself. Let's jump on part 3. Part 3, hidden in plain sight. As the Cold War escalated, US nuclear weapons quietly spread across Europe, hidden within military bases that blended into the landscape. By the 1980s reign, over 7,000 American nuclear bombs were stationed across NATO countries, a massive arsenal kept largely out of public view. These weapons weren't just stored in remote bunkers, many were placed in operational air bases, behind fences in quiet European towns. The strategy relied on secrecy and control. Specialized units like the US Air Force's munition support squadrons were embedded in Allied bases, trained to maintain and secure the bombs 24/7, even though the land technically belonged to a host nation. This allowed the US to project nuclear power without ever launching from American soil. But the secrecy came with challenges. Local populations were rarely informed. In places like Buchel, Germany, Aviano, Italy, and in Incirlik, Turkey, the presence of nuclear bombs was widely suspected but never officially confirmed. A policy known as neither confirm nor deny. Even today, most of these sites have no public signage or acknowledgement of what lies beneath. This veil of silence served to reduce public backlash and avoid becoming targets. Yet at the same time, it created a dangerous paradox. Weapons of unimaginable destruction placed in democratic countries without democratic oversight. As tensions rose, cracks in that silence began to show. Certainly. Let's discuss the part 4. Part 4. The European Dilemma. Now, while the United States viewed nuclear sharing as a cornerstone of NATO deterrence, many European nations found themselves trapped in a strategic paradox. On one hand, hosting U.S. nuclear weapons guaranteed protection under the American nuclear umbrella. On the other, it made those countries mill prime targets in the event of a conflict with the Soviet Union and now Russia. Political leaders often supported the deployments behind closed doors, but public opinion was another matter. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, waves of anti-nuclear protests swept across Europe. Millions took to the streets in Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, demanding the removal of U.S. bombs and warning of the catastrophic consequences if a nuclear war broke out on their soil. This pressure created friction within NATO. European governments had to walk a tightrope, publicly advocating for peace and disarmament while privately renewing U.S. nuclear hosting agreements. Even today, the debate continues. Some nations have called for removal, while others quietly accept the status quo to maintain favor with Washington. The dilemma is deep. Surrender the weapons and risk weakening NATO's unity, or keep them and live with the fear of being a frontline battlefield in the next major war. It's a geopolitical bargain that European democracies never fully made, and one that still leaves citizens in the dark. Now we will discuss the exciting Part 5. Part 5. Incirlik, America's most vulnerable bomb site. Among all the U.S. nuclear deployments in Europe, Incirlik Air Base in Turkey stands out as the most geopolitically volatile. Located just 70 miles from the Syrian border, this NATO base holds an estimated 50 B-61 nuclear bombs, making it the largest single U.S. nuclear stockpile outside the United States. Yet the site is not under American sovereign control. The land belongs to Turkey, and the base operates under a fragile bilateral agreement that can be revoked at any time. This arrangement has raised serious concerns in Washington, especially in recent years. In 2016, during a failed coup attempt in Turkey, power to the base was cut off, and Turkish authorities temporarily blocked all U.S. flights. For a brief moment, America's most dangerous weapons sat stranded, with no clear chain of command and a rising fear they could be seized. The incident revealed a deep flaw in NATO's nuclear posture. The bombs are vulnerable not only to external threats, but also to internal political turmoil in host countries. Since then, military analysts and members of Congress have questioned why these weapons are still stationed in such a high-risk environment. Yet despite the risks, the bombs remain in Incirlik, a symbol of U.S.-Turkey relations, and a reminder that America's nuclear presence abroad isn't just about military strategy, it's about navigating unstable politics in real time. Now jumping to Part 6. Part 6. Broken arrows and close calls. The presence of U.S. nuclear weapons in Europe hasn't just raised strategic and political concerns, it's also come dangerously close to catastrophe. Throughout the Cold War and beyond, there have been multiple accidents, mishandlings, and false alarms involving American nukes, many of which occurred on or near European soil. These incidents are known by the Pentagon as broken arrows. Situations where a nuclear weapon was lost, damaged, or came close to detonation. Though most details remain classified, declassified reports and whistleblowers have revealed just how close the world came to disaster. Not once, but repeatedly. In 1966, a US B-52 bomber carrying nuclear bombs collided mid-air with a refueling plane over Palomares, Spain, dropping 4 bombs over the Spanish countryside. While no warheads detonated, radioactive material contaminated the region, and it took years to clean up. In other cases, bombs have been mistakenly loaded, flown without authorization, or improperly guarded during political unrest. Europe, with its crowded airspace and patchwork of control protocols, adds layers of complexity to already dangerous operations. These close calls highlight a chilling reality. The greatest threat from U.S. nuclear weapons hasn't always been enemies. Sometimes it's human error and miscommunication. And with dozens of live bombs still deployed across Europe today, the margin for error remains razor thin. Now, before starting the part 7, make sure you subscribe my channel, because this part will shock you. So do hit the subscribe button. Let's start. Part 7, the B-61, America's most controversial bomb. At the center of the U.S. nuclear presence in Europe lies the B-61 nuclear bomb, a weapon as compact as it is devastating. First developed in the 1960s, the B-61 was designed to be versatile, airdropped, and adjustable in explosive yield. Its latest version, the B-61-12, is now being deployed across NATO bases, featuring precision guidance systems and an adjustable yield ranging from 0.3 to 50 kilotons. Now, this means a single bomb can be dialed from a small tactical strike to a city flattening blast, all in a weapon light enough to fit in a fighter jet. What makes the B-61-12 particularly controversial is its strategic ambiguity. Supporters argue it strengthens deterrence by giving NATO a credible, flexible response to Russian aggression. Critics say the bomb lowers the threshold for nuclear war, making the idea of using a small nuke seem more acceptable in conflict scenarios. In Europe, where these bombs are actively stationed, the debate is even sharper. Are they a shield against tyranny or a tripwire for global catastrophe? Despite being under tight security, the bomb's very presence, modernized, upgraded, and redeployed, sends a message. The Cold War may be over, but the nuclear playbook is still wide open. Now starting Part 8. Part 8. Russia knows, and they're watching. While the U.S. keeps its European nuclear deployments shrouded in diplomatic silence, Russia knows exactly where those bombs are, and it watches them closely. From spy satellites to underground intelligence, Russian military planners have long included U.S. nuclear sites in Europe on their first strike target lists. In a potential conflict, bases in Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Turkey would be among the first places hit, not for what they are, but for what they store beneath them. This isn't Cold War paranoia. It's baked into modern Russian doctrine. Since the 2010s, Moscow has emphasized the role of tactical nuclear weapons in its military strategy, especially in conflicts near NATO borders. Russian officials have repeatedly warned that any attempt by NATO to use nuclear weapons, even in a limited way, would trigger an overwhelming response. The presence of B-61 bombs in Europe gives the US and NATO a forward deployed option. But it also gives Russia a justification for nuclear posturing of its own, including the recent deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus. In essence, the bombs are not just deterrents, they're magnets for attention, escalation, and risk. Their continued existence has turned quiet European towns into nuclear bullseyes, and both sides know it. The standoff may be silent, but the message is clear. Every bomb stored in Europe is already part of someone else's war plan. Now start Part 9. Part 9, the pushback, protest, politics, and whistleblowers. For decades, the presence of U.S. nuclear bombs in Europe has sparked fierce resistance, not from governments, but from ordinary people, activists, and even former insiders. From the 1980s anti-nuclear movements to recent protests outside bases like Büchel in Germany and Aviano in Italy, citizens have repeatedly demanded the removal of these weapons, arguing they make their countries targets, not safer. These movements are often grassroots, made up of students, clergy, scientists, and veterans who believe that nuclear deterrence is outdated and dangerously provocative. Some of the most compelling opposition has come from whistleblowers and retired military officials who've exposed safety flaws, security lapses, and outdated infrastructure at nuclear sites. A 2008 U.S. Air Force review even admitted that some European bases housing nuclear weapons did not meet U.S. security standards. That revelation sent shockwaves through NATO, but little changed. Politically, the issue remains taboo. While some European parties have called for the bomb's removal, few governments have taken public action, fearing a breach in alliance trust with Washington or appearing weak in front of Russia. Yet the resistance is growing louder. Leaked documents, satellite images, and investigative journalism have chipped away at official silence. For many Europeans, the message is clear. They never voted to host nuclear bombs, but they live under their shadow. And as public awareness grows, the pressure to end this legacy of Cold War secrecy continues to rise. Now the last conclusion part starts. Part 10. Why the bombs remain and what comes next. Despite decades of protest, political shifts, and the end of the Cold War, the U.S. nuclear bombs in Europe remain, not by accident, but by deliberate design. These weapons are more than war tools. They are symbols of alliance, leverage, and deterrence. For NATO, they represent unity and shared responsibility. For the United States, they offer strategic positioning and influence over European security. Removing them would be seen by some as a weakening of Western resolve, especially as tensions with Russia escalate and new global threats emerge. In an age of rising authoritarianism, hybrid warfare, and renewed nuclear arms races, many argue these bombs are still needed, not to be used, but simply to exist as a silent threat. But the world has changed. The geopolitical lines are no longer as clear as they were during the Cold War. Public trust in secrecy has eroded. Technology has made it harder to hide anything. And more than ever, citizens are asking whether these weapons really make them safer or put them at greater risk. The US must now confront a critical choice: continue to defend the past or redefine deterrence for the future. The bombs in Europe are not forgotten relics. They are active, ready, and still shaping global security. Their presence tells a story of Cold War fears that never fully died, of alliances held together by dangerous promises, and of a world still struggling with the question: can peace be kept with weapons built for the end of the world? In the silence beneath Europe's soil, the answer remains buried, for now.